Good morning. My name is Lisette Seine-Pontemy. I work at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology and at the University of Twente as full professor of aquatic monitoring of ecosystems. And together with Guido Smits from Fresh Thoughts Consulting and Erika Albrecht from Suke, we will be talking to you this morning about adaptive management of drying river networks. And because we want to make this a little bit interactive, we will be polling through Mentimeter. And just for you to be prepared, we would like to invite you really quickly to open Mentimeter in a different tab on your computer. And so we will be prepped once the polling starts. So the polling is just interweaved throughout our presentation. So there will be 3 questions altogether. And I'm just going to give a minute for people to scan the QR code, either on this slide or in the chat, or join at menti.com using the code 36159021. And if you please could let us know in the chat whether you have problems accessing, and then our colleague Michaela can help you out. So climate change and increased human water use causes rivers and streams to dry up, including in Europe, and this is dramatically increasing worldwide. And there is an urgent need to understand the socio-ecological consequences of drying. So there's an understanding that river networks are not only an ecosystem, but they're a socio-ecosystem as well, and that they have important provisioning of ecosystem services. And drying may cause shifts from permanent to intermittent flows, which can be major tipping points for river. And this can have important environmental, but also socio-economical consequences. So this is a paper by Messenger et al. In 2021 in Nature, which shows the global estimates of drying river networks under current conditions. And there you can see that, and you see that on the left, you see the probability of flow intermittence, and you see there's, especially in the Mediterranean areas, there's a high probability of flow intermittence occurring. When we are doing, we're doing a lot of co-creation in the project DRYvER, and then we are always questioning very diverse stakeholder groups what their perception is of drying river networks. And we take the approach of the IPBS, the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, that recognizes 3 different perspectives. Nature for nature, so this is about the intrinsic value of nature. Nature as culture, so this is nature, the cultural values of nature. So you can think, for instance, of, in my case, I'm from the Netherlands, the cultural value of ice skating is very much recognized in the Netherlands, but also actually the high level of water control we do to poldering and to land reclamation, that is also makes water part of our culture. And then lastly, and that is more traditional, what people would see as ecosystem services, there is the perspective of nature for society. And this is an example of France, where we question people where they would position themselves in this triangle between nature for nature, nature as culture, and nature for society. And there you see that quite some people, and this was the first stakeholder groups, from fishermen to local teachers to people that actually are more in the tourism area, or people that are in nature conservation or land water managers. And we asked them, where do you position yourself along these 3 perspectives? And then you see that quite a bit of the people we invited recognize the intrinsic value for nature, but also the instrumental value of nature, so nature for society, and so the services that these drying river networks provide. So managing the desired future for drying river networks is what we call a wicked environmental problem. And wicked environmental problems have a couple of traits. Time is pressing, so there's little time to actually to restore or preserve or maintain these drying river networks. Those seeking to solve the problem are also part of the problem, and we see that, for instance, we were last autumn we were doing a co-creation workshop in Alberine, and then we see, for instance, that the people, the fishermen that seek to solve the problem are sometimes also part of the problem. The central authority is lacking, and this we see actually across various different countries, and future policy is often postponed. And what is adaptive management? The key topic of our webinar today. One of the key traits of adaptive management is that it's uncertainty explicit. So it recognizes that there's uncertainty in implementing certain measures or solutions. It allows for a process of iterative decision making, and very importantly, there's an element of learning over time through monitoring and evaluation. So you need to have the right monitoring tools in place, but also the right evaluation tools in place. And there's an element of improving over time through adjustment based on monitoring and evaluation. So this monitoring and evaluation and having the right monitoring tools and evaluation tools is actually really key to adaptive management. The other element, which is often not seen in management plan, that is uncertainty explicit, and that causes also a little bit of a mind shift of both scientists and managers, to be honest. Next, we will be talking about adaptive governance of drying river networks, and that will be done by Erika, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and Erika can take over. Erika? Yeah.
Yes, and I will continue from here on adaptive governance of drying river networks. And as Lisette said, it's very relevant for the drying river networks to look at the adaptive side of management and governance. As we know, the climate change is a pressing issue, and we need to address those by adaptive means. And to give a short introduction, when looking at water, water is not a commercial product like any other, but rather heritage which must be protected and defended and treated as such. So when we think about water as a natural resource, it's flowing over space and time, and it has this kind of, it's in a continuous movement. And to give a bit of global perspective, we have this kind of pressing global problem of drying, which can be also, it's visible in satellite data. So it's possible to monitor also the groundwater levels around the globe. So this is not by DRYvER, but there is reference to articles that have been published in Nature about also that the pressing problems are also where lots of our global megacities have been located worldwide. And then if we look at Europe, there is also significant drying especially in the southern parts, but increasingly also in the Central Europe, also in the European North, even you would not consider it as significant. When looking at the adaptive governance, it has been defined as So it aims at increased capacity of complex socio-ecological systems to respond to changing circumstances. And it takes also scale and social ecological complexity into account and motivates experimentation to reduce uncertainty. So it is a continuous process of developing governance goals in a joint network process and then responding to the continuous change. And governance has been defined as a process of interaction between different societal and political actors. And here I also make reference to this kind of production of socio-nature, which is a loop form presentation of this adaptive governance. And when you add also the context of water management and governance, then there is a concept of hydrosocial cycle, which means that it's a socio-natural process to evaluate how water flows through space and time and how it is shaped by societal factors and vice versa, such as institutions, practices, and discourses, which influence water management. So in this figure, you see water flowing through space and time, but also producing commodified, so also food and fiber, and so it's part of our economic process as well. It's not and the societal processes as well. So it's the eco-social interactions that play a role here. We are dependent of water. And in the European policies and legislation, the adaptive governance has been approached in multiple policy frameworks. And when talking about water, the Water Framework Directive is one of the most significant ones. It has been aiming since 2000 on good status of waters in all Europe. So it sets the objective of achieving good environmental status. And it also establishes a framework for protection of all waters, including rivers, lakes, estuaries, coastal waters, and groundwater, and their dependent wildlife habitats, and it's all within one piece of environmental legislation. And there have been multiple cycles of implementation. So in this, the reference to adaptive governance is this kind of planning cycles that are for each 6 years, and then the directive is the implementation is based on this river basin management plans, and those are then updated each 6 years. And also the directive takes river basin district as a unit of management for river basins. So those administrative units are different to, for example, regional administration, although they are often managed from the same offices. And water management is based on hydrographic boundaries. So we are talking about the river basin as an administrative unit. And also the directive involves public. And when thinking about drying rivers, the problem is that it does not recognize drying as an ecological quality parameter, and also when the river ceases to exist, so it's dry, it's not already anymore managed under this Water Framework Directive good environmental status objective. And then when considering also other relevant environmental legislation and policies in Europe. There is also Habitat Directive, which sets objectives for favorable conservation status, and also Bird Directive is related to conservation of species. So these are also relevant EU legislation when thinking about environmental condition and biodiversity in driving river networks. And also to add, there is the European Green Deal of European Union, and also commitment in the EU biodiversity strategy. And there is an initiative to for the river restoration legislation, which would it has been proposed that it would include a policy for restoring 25,000 river kilometers across the Europe, also aiming for barrier removal, but also restoration of floodplains and European rivers. And here you could join the Menti. Here is the code. I will leave this open now for 1 minute.
Shall I just go to the Menti, and then people have also time to use the screen? Yeah. I will slowly go to the. You're still able to log in using the code above 36159021, and we'll wait until we see to discuss this till we see a number of people popping up. Do you want to reflect on this, Erika?
Shows that clearly regulatory measures are favored by this audience. If we would ask this elsewhere, then we might get different results. I think we can move forward to keep the time.
Okay. And next is Guido.
I'm doing far too many things at the same time. Sorry. Good morning to everybody. So I'm trying to unmute me, but after sharing the screen, then it's more difficult. So I hope you can see my screen. Can you?
No, you're sharing the Teams meeting. You're not sharing your slides.
Okay. Sorry. Wait, and I will stop sharing, and I will have to go Teams meeting again. I mean, how often have we done this? And still, when you have to do it, then it doesn't work out properly. So now I hope it should be working, and I will put it in the full screen mode here. So does it work now? Okay,
Perfect.
Good. I'm very happy about this. Sorry. As I said, good morning to everybody. I'm talking now about another activity which we did in the project and which really is very much connected to the question which we made beforehand in the Menti about which might be the solutions, because we have been analyzing what are the barriers and what are the problems and what are the opportunities for the drying river networks to have a better water management. So we looked at the 6 case studies, which you can see here on the map. And then maybe some of you are familiar already with the DPSIR framework, which is an absolute techno jargon which we are using, which is referring to the drivers, to the pressures, to the status, the impact and the responses in the water management. And it's one of the concepts which have been heavily used by the Water Framework Directive. It was initiated by the OECD and the European Environmental Agency. And it really tries to understand when we look at the status, I know this is very small and you can't see it very well, but if we look at the status which we can monitor and we see, for example, that there's a problem with invertebrates or that we have some pollution issues, we should ask ourselves, okay, what is the cause for this? So what are the pressures really leading to this deterioration of the status? And then we might find that we have some water abstraction pressures or that we have a pollution pressure. And then we can also ask us, okay, but who is responsible for this? So very often it's agriculture, it's the urban water use, it's the industry, but it can also be tourism or other uses. So if we have that understanding where the problem is coming from, then we also can see often what are the consequences of the bad water quality, for example, in the river. So what are the impacts? And these impacts can have effects on biodiversity, and they can also affect on some of the ecosystem services, as Lisette was presenting at the beginning. And then the measures, the responses, the R from the DPSIR, they should be able, and this is shown here in the graph, to respond to the different issues, to foster that, for example, the drivers, the agriculture, for example, and the irrigation, that they don't make an abstraction pressure on a river which has a poor status of water in the summer, and then all the water is gone. So there might be some subsidies, for example, to change some of these practices. There might be some more control on the pressure so you don't have an illegal borehole or an illegal water abstraction for that area. And there might also be interventions or responses or measures that work on the impacts and for example, target some protected species which are in some areas and which might be only located in these areas, and then during a drought or during an impact area, you could have an ex situ conservation of these species. So that is what we have been looking at. And we assessed for all the case studies 3 main documents. So the river basin management plans, and we looked at all the different cycles to understand how they have evolved. We looked at the nature conservation plans, for example, the Natura 2000 management plans, where we do have protected areas. And we looked at the rural development plans from the Common Agricultural Policy, because all our case studies, they're in rural areas. And we really thought that something should be set in these areas, because agriculture can contribute a lot on reducing the pressures and fostering better management of these drying river networks. And then if I'm clicking here exactly, then for each of the case studies, we made such a schema, just going from the drivers to the pressures to the status, and then which are the impacts and which are the responses, the measures which are being developed in these different documents. So this is here the overview for the France case study. And we can see that the drivers let's start with the status, exactly, because, for example, we found out that the biological quality elements for the whole drying river network were poor, but in some part fish is quite good. The benthic invertebrates, they are poor. The chemical, physical quality elements, so for example, nutrients or phosphates, this satisfactory, good. But the hydromorphological quality elements at the bottom here, this is not monitored. So some information is there, not all the information we would like to see. There's a very little information about what these impacts really mean to people and to the environment, like biodiversity loss here. So these are copy pastes from these documents. So it just says a possible biodiversity loss. Nothing else is there in what we have found. And then we have looked at the pressures. So pollution, nutrients pollution, pesticide pollution, phosphorus and toxic substances, water abstractions, dams, and then also some alterations. Curious to see that there has been no monitoring of the hydromorphological quality elements, but there have been some hydromorphological pressures from these drivers, which we have seen: agriculture, household, urban, and climate change. So in the plan, there's some activity, or in the plans, there's some activities foreseen, but really the most important ones are on fish passages, improving the ecological continuity of the river, and some river restoration. This is something we did for all the case studies. We brought it together in one overall schema, and here you can see some more information. It's quite similar to what we have seen before. It's a bit more streamlined, but this is almost all the information we found for all the different drying river networks. And for many of the water bodies which are included, or the protected areas, none of these information was available. So there's a big knowledge gap which we have identified, even if we have been able to draw this overall schema of what are the different aspects which are relevant for the water management. We can see that the responses usually they refer to the water allocation regime, so who gets the water and how much water do these people or users get, and this addresses here the drivers and the pressures, and that's the D and the P, which you can see here. Then there should be some ecological flow in the river, at least in some of the case studies we've seen this, also addressing the drivers and the pressures. And then river restoration measures. And river restoration very often is focused on the impacts and sometimes also on the status here. But we should be aware that river restoration doesn't solve the problem, because, I mean, if we continue with the drivers and with the pressures, I mean, they continue having negative effects on the status. So the more the measures are targeted, or the responses are targeted on this starting line here, the more effects we should be seeing in the improvement of the water bodies and the river networks. And then based on that, the second activity which we undertook was to make a catalog of barriers and the opportunities. So how can we change this? We made a stakeholder mapping. We tried to identify stakeholders for all the case studies, and we have been more successful in some of them and less in others. And we discussed with the stakeholders which barriers and which opportunities they would see. And we will make the question afterwards to you. Then we made a literature review of some other projects which have been working on this already. And then we also looked at the European strategies on biodiversity and adaptation to climate change. So which barriers do they see, which opportunities do they see, and how do they act on this? And with this, we compiled a list of different barriers and opportunities. And here I ask Lisette to jump in again. I will stop sharing. And then you can share again your screen with the Menti, because we would like to see your opinion. I mean, I have in the background my slide on which is the understanding of the stakeholders we've been talking to and what is reflected in the plans, because some of the plans we have analyzed, they also refer to barriers which are there and the opportunities. But I'm curious to see this, to see your opinion. And we decided that we wanted to see your opinion before showing our own results. So here you have a list of different potential barriers for having a better water management. And it could be, for example, about the data and the knowledge. It could be about the funding for solutions and the resources which the administrations have. It could be about stakeholder engagement, the availability of technical solutions. It could be laws, legal rights, and licenses. Maybe, I mean, many of you asked in the previous Menti about whether this is relevant, whether there should be more regulation. Here we have again the funding for solutions. So on the first one, go to the administrative resources and for the funding. Sorry for this error which I've put here in. Is it about institutional cooperation? Is it about awareness and appreciation what the drying river networks are, which services they provide to us? So you can, I don't know how many you can choose on this, but I'm keen to see.
Slider. So people are allowed to slide whether they are strongly or disagree or strongly agree.
That's a fashion thing I haven't been using for a long time ago. Good. So let's see. And we do have already 6 responses, right? Is that the number on the bottom?
6 responses.
Yeah. Good. We have some more people here in the group, so please use it. Please provide us with your thoughts. And exactly, you can use all of them, or tick all of them, or move all of them to the right side. Yeah, it doesn't seem so very clear where you believe that this is a stronger barrier. I mean, it seems to be that the availability of how to manage the rivers better is not one of the major barriers or concern, but there's a lot about all the others, from the data to the legislation and the institutional cooperation. Yeah, I mean, what we found out in our case studies, and that was varying, and we asked also people which things or which aspects they saw as barriers and which ones they saw rather as an opportunity. But there was lots about the institutional cooperation. And this is something where we really believe that there could be much more. We saw it when we looked at the plans. So even if in the river basin management plans there was information that there was a problem with overuse of water resources, this was not necessarily reflected in the Natura 2000 management plans or the agriculture plans, which sometimes even foster irrigation in the same areas. Yeah, and the funding is definitively needed. Yeah, funding was also one of the issues which was marked everywhere. And the stakeholder engagement. We also had one concern from the stakeholders. We asked for their feedback on the conflicts, because very often there are conflicts about the river. Who has the right to use the water? Who has the right to be the, let's say, the owner of the river and to take decisions on how the water and the river are being used? And shall everybody participate, or is it just, let's say, simplifying, the biggest landowner or the person who uses most water? So I think this is quite good. Thanks for this feedback. It will help us. We will, in the project, we still have to continue working on the policy recommendations. So the information from the previous mentee and from this one here, they will guide us. They will not make a full decision, but at least we will bear this into account, and it helps us for going forward. And Lisette, I hand back to you, right? Good. Then it's your turn again.
Thanks for this. And the typo was, of course, mine, not Guido. So Guido is very nice to say that. So next, and also the last part of our talk will be, or webinar will be, about nature-based solutions in adaptive management. The EU Commission defines nature-based solutions as solutions that are inspired and supported by nature, which are cost-effective, simultaneously providing environmental, social, and economic benefits and help build resilience. And I think it's important to recognize, because there seems to be quite some confusion about nature-based solutions, that these are also about social and economic benefits. And the idea is that these solutions bring more and more diverse nature and natural features in landscapes, seascapes, and cities. The concepts of nature-based solutions have been already uptaken in policy, importantly in the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which will lead to the EU Restoration Law, the United Framework for Convention on Climate Change, and the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. And to make it a little bit more tangible, and to talk a little bit about what is an MES and what it isn't, we look at this sort of gradient from gray solutions to natural solutions. So a gray solution is a project or scheme constructed with little or no ecological consideration. So these are typically dams or flood walls. Then you have green-gray solutions, which are gray infrastructure that incorporates elements of an habitat, and this could be, for instance, fish-friendly sluices or weirs. Then you have traditional hybrids, traditional engineering confronted by natural features. So this is the forestation for flood retention, for instance. Then there is prompted recovery, and that is a scheme initiated by human input that is depending on natural processes. So wetland creation is an example of that, and forest plantation is also an example of that. And then we have the most extreme form of nature-based solutions, which are naturally occurring habitats, so wetland, salt marshes, forest. And I guess the examples of rewilding are examples of that. But do bear in mind that they have to have economic and societal benefits as well. So it's important, and I can't emphasize this enough, that nature-based solutions are about socio-ecological systems. So they link the ecosystem with the socio-economical system. So an ecosystem has a certain sensitivity where it is exposed to different types of hazards or risk, and it has an adaptive capacity. And risks and hazards can lead to potential impact. And this can either increase the flow of ecosystem service or decrease the flow of ecosystem service or maintain the flow of ecosystem services. And on the other hand, you have the socio-economical systems, and you have the same type of elements, so exposure and sensitivity, and both of these lead to a potential impact and an adaptive capacity. And this then leads to the use and management of ecosystem services. So, and when we talk about ecosystem service in the context of drying river networks, we're thinking, for instance, about flood retention, we're thinking about water retention, the filtration capacity of the wetlands or the riparian zone surrounding the rivers, the role the drying rivers have in the carbon cycle, and importantly, recreational services. If we think about the Living Planet Index, and that is an index that is created by the World Wildlife, no, sorry, it's not the World Wildlife Fund, but it is an index that is a measure of the state of the world's biological biodiversity on population trends of vertebrate species from terrestrial, marine, and aquatic habitats. And it compares the situation that we have now compared to the situation, to the baseline situation of 1970. And then you see that we are, over the period of about 50 years, we're looking at a 60–80% loss over time in 2022. And this is, of course, is a really cause of concern, and it adds a sense of urgency to biodiversity conservation. And this all leads to highly ambitious targets for biodiversity integrated climate solutions. And these were, amongst others, discussed both on the COP, the climate COPs, but also on the Montreal meeting. And this sense of urgency really is a call for accelerated actions in order to bend the biodiversity curve. And that calls for unprecedented actions. And with unprecedented action, that means also that it has to have an element of transformative change. Because if we are doing what we're not doing now, so business as usual, that won't be stopping our biodiversity loss. So if you think about different types of adaptation strategies, there's levels of adaptation to climate change, and that is based on the magnitude of human inputs. There is, on the baseline, there's inaction. So you're just thinking about, if we take this from an example of croplands, we're looking at harvesters losses. So we're just accepting that we're losing biodiversity. If we're thinking about coping, then we're doing little things such as, and I'll give some more examples later, to cope with our losses. If we think about incremental adaptation, then we're doing small steps, but we're not really bending the curve. We're preventing loss, and it's a little bit more than a standstill situation. If we're looking at transformative adaptation, then we're really thinking about very drastic measures such as important land use changes. So coping, and this is and I'm not going into detail about, but this is about ecological resilience frameworks that have been very importantly developed by Volker, but also by Scheffer and the like. You see the difference in impact between coping, incremental adaptation, and transformative adaptation. And it's now recognized that we need to really start thinking about transformative change in order to make that important bend of the biodiversity curve. If we look at the challenges that are associated with nature-based solutions and the need for transformative changes, then you can sort of bring them down to personal challenges, which are often related to knowledge, values, and worldviews. If we think of, for instance, about drying river network, the under-perception of drying rivers is one of the challenges to the implementation of nature-based solutions. Another one is the political challenges, which can pertain to rules and instruments. So that is the regulatory frameworks that have been discussed in the beginning of this webinar. And there can be also practical challenges, such as related to technology, related to ecosystem management, but also related to behaviors. And there's different types of indicators of transformative change in socio-ecological systems, and I'll be going through them one by one. So you have path shifting indicators, and they relate to ecological path shifting indicators. So the ecosystem shifts towards an alternative stable state. So in the situation of a drying river network, a river becomes permanently dry, so it's no longer existent, or becomes permanently perennial. You have social path shifting indicators, and that shifts towards alternative development pathways. And then you have to think about, for instance, the energy transition that is going on right now. You have socio-ecological pathways, and they pertain to sustainability, resilience, but also important to equity, so equal distribution of resources. And then restructuring is also an important indicator of transformative change. And if we think about ecological characteristic, then we're talking about substantive restructuring of ecosystem states. So we're thinking about species abundance and diversity and ecological functions. When we talk about social, we talk about shifting of power relationships. We see, for instance, in the co-creation workshop that there's often lack of institutional cooperation. There's power dynamics that actually are a major barrier for implementation of local measures. And there's socio-ecological restructuring traits. So that is the radical alteration of interaction between people and nature. So really changing the way we value nature. And then multi-scale, that is recognizing that these changes, they need to happen at multiple scales. So if for ecological system, that is at multiple trophical levels and spatial scales, but for social, it means that it is across jurisdictional and societal levels. And for socio-ecological, then we talk about different types of governance structures that are not conflicting. Innovative means that there's new species of variety and composition in the ecosystems. And if you think about drying river networks, we're looking at different new unprecedented combinations of abiotic conditions that actually might give rise to new species in the system. And for the reasons of time, I'm not going to go through all of these examples, but I really invite you to look at this important paper because it really makes you think about transformative change more. If we think about system-wide changes, then we talk about really having large areas of ecosystem or landscapes being transformative changed. If I take it back to my home country, the Netherlands, we have really a patchwork of very small Nature 2000 areas. And we are going against this system-wide idea of transformative change. And actually, space is often one of the big barriers for the implementation of nature-based solutions, because nature-based solutions need both pace and space. So you need time, but also space. And importantly, there needs to be persistency in the indicators of transformative change. So if you think about ecological systems, then they need to be hard to reverse. So they need to be very resistant to change. That is true for social change as well. It doesn't need to be a wimpy type of change. It needs to be persistent over several generations. So really thinking about alternative stable states in the socio-economical system. If we think about socio-ecological change, it needs to be future-oriented and long-term, but not necessarily irreversible. So now I would like to bring it back to put nature-based solutions in drying river networks. What we did in the project DRYvER is that we also took a functional spatial unit approach where we categorized nature-based solutions in 4 different levels: catchment, floodplain, riparian buffer, and river reach. And the reason why we did this is also because these different spatial levels actually talk to different types of decision makers. If you think about a catchment, you're often talking to river basin authorities, so the competent authorities, sometimes provinces, or on a state level you're acting. If you think about the river reach, you're also talking perhaps also more to drinking water agencies if the river has an important function in drinking water supply. If you think about the riparian buffer, you're often also talking to landowners, and this might be true to some extent for floodplains as well. And I'll give some examples that we based on a literature review we did on nature-based solutions potential to mitigate droughts. And there we came up with a couple of examples, and it's not exhaustive, of course, what I'm showing here, but I'll give you, to make it a little bit more tangible, I'll give you some examples. So when we think about the river reach, then beaver dams are often seen as a way of mitigating drought. And that is this, what we see in almost all the drying river networks, there is a tendency to run the water through the system as fast as possible through a network of concrete channels, for instance. And these beaver dams, or what we saw in Finland, for instance, big boulders, putting big boulders to slow down the flow, are seen as nature-based solutions. If you think about riparian buffers, then importantly wetlands come to mind. So the important functions of having a connectivity between the river and its adjacent wetland. And this is true, of course, for floodplains as well, that connectivity is one of the key elements of nature-based solutions for floodplains. And if you think about catchment, then land use change come to mind. So conversion of agricultural fields to natural areas, reforestation, but importantly with the right type of trees that are endemic to the area, and these sort of big land use changes. So in summary, nature-based solutions have to benefit both people and nature. They link social and ecological systems, and they're a tool towards transformative change. So they're not just a physical solution, right? They're also a social solution and a socio-economical solution. And I'm also going to welcome you again to the Mentimeter. And let's see if that works out. And I think it does. And this is an open question, because what we see there's quite a bit of nature-based solutions out there. They're not specific to DRNs, and importantly, they're lacking scientific underpinning. So there's limited dose effect relationship between nature-based solutions and their effectivity in mitigating drying. And then often people say, oh, everything needs to be very specific to the system, and we understand that. But what we see as well during the co-creation workshop, there seems to be a locked into technological solution, and managers are often looking for general guiding principles that will lead the way to nature-based solutions. So it's important to recognize that. And we're seeing here, for instance, earth bonds. And I'm not familiar with that term, so maybe the person can explain in the chat what they mean. Riparian vegetation is one that is mentioned, and the natural riparian forest. But there's a lot about the riparian zone, so that's functional spatial unit riparian zone. Increased retention of water in headwater catchments. Reduce channelization and open floodplains. So this is also the idea of re-meandering the rivers. In the Netherlands, we had a big campaign which was called Room for the Rivers, where we gave more room to rivers, and protect the connectivity between the river and the forest. These are already some nice suggestions. And I'll give you a little bit more time, but I'm also conscious of your time. Water retention pond nearby drying river networks to dilute abstraction pressures. Yeah. what we saw in almost all the drying river networks that we have been visiting over the past years is that water abstraction is actually increasing the climate-induced drying. So in almost all the case studies, there was a water abstraction issue as well. Wetlands to buffer low flows, I'm seeing. Recovery of native forest in the catchment, so faster recovery of native forest in the catchment. I think not so many more things are popping up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and leave some time for Q&A. And remember, you can ask questions to any of the speakers.
I think Polona has.
Polona explained what earth bonds are. And I know them from the Netherlands, but of course we don't call them earth bonds. Yeah.
Let's give her the microphone to Polona if we don't have any other questions yet.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's just they call them very different names in different parts of the world, but they are used throughout, and it's on small slopes. They form naturally if we don't interrupt natural processes, but in agricultural areas this can prevent water losses. Behind these bands the water stays and infiltrates the water, so it's a water conservation measure.
Yeah. What do you call them in your? We call them ribbetjes, like the ones you have here in the in the Netherlands. So I know them from the Netherlands, but I don't. So I was always associating bonds with something economical.
Okay.
But, yeah. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. So what are the next steps regarding a nature-based solution in the project?
It's a very difficult question, Margot. It's depending, I think, on the people involved in the project as well. What we see is that there's little scientific underpinning of nature-based solutions, and that is a problem. It's not only a problem for drying river network, it's a problem for nature-based solutions across multiple ecosystems. And what I also perceive that there seems to be a gap between science and management. Scientists say, okay, we don't understand enough, so we need to understand more. But at the same time, managers don't have enough time to wait for this understanding. I think what it calls for is actually that there, and I think drivers should at least contribute to that. It calls for this what we call adaptive management, that you are monitoring very well what you're doing, but also make explicit what the uncertainty around certain things is. And I really would welcome, but we're not going to do that, if we would model this as well in DRYvER. We're not going to do that through hydrological modeling, but even though that model might be wrong, as long as we monitor the uncertainty, we can give the managers something to go by. Because for me, as a scientist that works on the interface between science and management, I think I feel embarrassed if we say, yeah, managers are doing wrong, but at the same time, we're not providing them with the right tools. And I think they are pressed for time, so they are really looking for solutions. And it's challenging to get them out of this locked in of channelizing, building concrete, drainage dishes, and so on. So the more information we can provide on the value of nature-based solution, even if it is uncertain type of information. And I would really welcome that we adopt IPCC type of language there, that we say, okay, this measure has this with so much certainty we can say that it's doing this. I think that can be already very valuable for managers, but that's my personal opinion.
I might add to this, Lisette. I agree on
Yeah.
the topic. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Paloma.
Yeah, sorry. I was just, I completely agree with Lisette, but at the same time, I think that if we, in the measures, if we include local scientists, or if the managers include local scientists when they are designing measures, local scientists have a lot of this information that we think is missing. On the local level, people, scientists, they have it, but managers are not including them when they are designing the measures. So a lot of knowledge is just ignored at this point. I think this is a big problem rather than not having information.
In the Netherlands, we do that. So I'm giving an example of the Netherlands. We do that. We have that interaction between, and then still there's not enough data. It's because what we do is so for Natura 2000, there's very little attention to process indicators. It's all about state variables. State variables will not give you any type of in-depth information to the effectivity of nature-based solutions. Importantly, and I talked to Thibaut, the coordinator of this project as well, there's a role for groundwater and thinking about the connectivity above ground, but also below ground, and what that does to nature. And yeah, so how many countries are actually having a very well-resolved spatial temporal schemes for groundwater monitoring? I would say in the Netherlands we monitor quite a bit, but when I do field visit, I still see this is often lacking, that there's not enough time. We don't see it, so we ignore it. And there's an important role for recharging, right? The capacity to recharge, yeah. But I agree with you. I think communication is essential, but I think we as managers or as scientists, we need to do a little bit better, I feel. Yeah, go ahead, Guido.
I think we're running out of time. I mean, we made a study recently, and there's a recent publication about the fact that from the nature-based solutions there is more and more data available of how they contribute to flood mitigation, but not at all about drought mitigation. And this in the drying river networks, that's very important, exactly. But yeah, that my short contribution here. And I think, Margot, we have to come to an end, right?
Yes, sure. Maybe someone has a last question.
Maybe just Guido made me remember. So when I was looking for concrete evidence of functionality of MBS, I found that for many drying mitigation measures of MBS, we have, or data have been collected in Asia and Africa. For Europe, when I am looking for examples, Europe has none, but we can find some data and some collected research in Africa and Asia, much more than in Europe.
And Australia, Polona?
Yeah, but I couldn't find that much information on water use efficiency, but yeah, probably as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to all the participants and also to the presenters for your very interesting presentations. It was really nice. So I think we can stop the webinar now, and I wish you a good weekend to everyone.
You too.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.